Indianapolis hangs on to beat the Tennessee Titans by a final score of 38-30. I think a lot more high scoring than people thought that it was going to be. But on Indianapolis' side of things, their offensive tackle, Bernard Ryman, was a top graded player with a 91.3. Guard Quentin Nelson, an 85.5. Defensive tackle, Grover Stewart with a 78.1. Running back, Jonathan Taylor, 78.0. And then wide receiver, Josh Towns, a 74.5. Anthony Richardson in this one, a 63.0 overall grade. On Tennessee's side, safety Amani Hooker at the top of their list with an 89.0. Tight end Chigakonkwo with a 79.9. Wide receiver Calvin Ridley, a 76.7. Edge rusher Harold Landry III, a 75.1. Defensive tackle Jeffrey Simmons, a 74.0. And then Mason Rudolph in this one. Man, thanks to some heroic, felt like, last couple of drives there to make this one close. 70.0 overall grade. Stat that told the story, Dalton. What do we got?
All right, so I have to give it away now. This was my whiteboard game that I was sitting around drawing everything and all the schemes up here because okay, so obviously the Colts ran the living hell out of the football. They ran for 335 yards. That's the most by any team this season. But the number that got me more, that starts this story, 173 yards before contact, okay? And maybe some people are going, well, how come Jonathan Taylor didn't have a 97 rushing grade because he ran for all these yards, right? Offensive line, that's immediate. When you have a high yards before contact number, it immediately is, okay, what did the offensive line do right? Were they just killing people up front? Was it the schemes, a combination of both? In this game, it was all of it. You saw the top two guys there with Ryman and Nelson. I'll get into them in a minute. But what makes the Colts run game unique, all right, they run the most power schemes out of any team in the league, all right? And they're pulling people all over the place, and they found every which way to do it in this game. So I had to break it down between, you're talking powers and counters and, pulling front side guards into pin pull and things like that. 20 out of their, I believe it was 50 carries, all right, in this game. They had a puller coming from somewhere. And it could be a guard, tackle, center, anywhere. They had a puller coming from somewhere. Those 20 carries, Trev, 242 yards and 4 touchdowns. And there's the 92-point rushing grade on those plays. What they did in this game, because obviously the biggest problem when you're playing the Titans defense is Simmons and Sweat in the middle, right? And Sebastian Joseph Day, he's been having a good year on the inside. So you're not just going to line up inside zone and run between the tackles into the A and B gaps against Tennessee. That's just not how it works. They got a really good set of defensive tackles. It's the best part of their team. What they did through formations and through all of the pulling and all their power schemes and different things was create that leverage through angles, and the easiest blocks for especially a Colts offensive line playing some young guys that has had some injury, especially on the right side. The easiest blocks for an offensive lineman is a down block. You either take your guy in the inside gap, and if there's no one in that inside gap, just get to the second level and go, okay? That's what the Colts did. They took Simmons and Sweat out of it because they walled them off and they created all those numbers, and they got blockers to the second level, especially I'll get into the Titans linebackers too because you had some young kids struggling with these schemes. That combination of things and the way that they decided to avoid Simmons and Sweat in this game wasn't necessarily to run outside, because sometimes, people would think, let's run toss sweep, let's run screens, let's be a perimeter team today. No, we don't have to do that. We just have to do it in a different way and create numbers. The way that the Colts use just a diversity, just a complete, just empty. Shane Steichen emptied the bucket with his run schemes in this game, with power, with pulling tackles, with, even Anthony Richardson on his design runs, and we're pin pulling with him and sending Taylor the other way so nobody knows which way the ball is going. An incredible job of scheming around some really good defensive tackles by Shane Steichen. And again, when you're talking about, 12 yards per carry, when the Colts pulled somebody to the other side of the line of scrimmage or even on the same side of pin pull and things like that. Just crazy. So the 4 plays that I do have written down are these 4 touchdowns that they scored on these plays.
Beautiful. I mean, it's just, and when you love acquiring talent either in free agency or the draft that allows you to have this sort of dominance in one. Now, you don't want to be obviously too one-dimensional with it, right? You don't want to get players who are incapable of zone blocking or doing the outside zone or the toss sweeps and things like that. You've got to get players who can be capable of it, but you do want to have an identity, right? We talked about that even earlier on this show. Some teams that have an identity and some that don't. And for the Colts, being a power rushing team and having that identity and having a running back, honestly, in Jonathan Taylor that really knows how to run behind this kind of a blocking scheme is perfect for them. And it was just a home run of an offensive strategy and execution by the Colts and what they were able to do in the run game. I mean, the stat that told the story for me, it's the same thing. It has to be the Colts' run success. So you were obviously able to break it down in even more detail. Taylor just overall 218 rushing yards on 29 carries. Richardson as well had 70 carries on 70 yards, on 9 carries. You mentioned the 335 rushing yards as a team. 162 of those came after contact, but you talked about how many of them came before contact as well. 0.209 EPA per rush. That was the 4th best rushing attack that they had in terms of EPA per rush so far this season. And so that was really the dominance, because Anthony Richardson barely passed the ball in this game. They were just so good on the ground, and exactly what they wanted to do. It felt like they imposed their will on a defensive line where I wasn't sure if they were going to be able to do that, to be honest with you. Most impressive for me outside of what the Colts did in the rushing game is Nick Westbrook-Ikhine. 9 touchdowns since week 5. Only Jamar Chase, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Terry McLaurin have more. He is just kind of quarterback proof, right? And I mean that not just between Mason Rudolph and Will Levis, but also when those guys are playing well and when they are not. Nick Westbrook-Ikhine seems to be getting in the end zone, and they seem to be big fans of his in the red zone and putting up 6 points. So he is my most impressive there. My most disappointing here in this one, I know you're going to talk about the Titans linebackers, who I thought struggled quite a bit, which I think is worth pointing out. But just overall, I think the Colts' fourth quarter defense was disappointing for me because it was such a great start for this group. First 2 quarters of the game, I thought they played really well. 0.567 EPA per play in the fourth quarter from the Colts was the 5th worst of any team in any quarter this week. Ironically, 2 of the teams that were worse than them, 2 of the 4 quarters that were worse than them, were owned by the Tennessee Titans in the second and third quarter because of how easy they made it for the Colts to run all over them. But just overall, Colts in the fourth quarter, a 50.1 defensive grade, and it just shows how up and down this Colts defense is, not just week to week, but even within games as well. So would have liked to see them finish this out a little bit stronger on the defense side of the football, and so that's where I was a little disappointed, because I felt like this should have been a runaway, no doubt about it type of a Colts win. And they just didn't quite get that because of the fact the Titans scored 3 touchdowns on 3 of their last 4 drives there. So just that fourth quarter defense, I was a little disappointed. But what about you? Impressive. I know you talked about the offensive line, but disappointing here in this one.
The impressive, I just want to dig into on that left side with those top 2 guys we saw in the grading, with Bernhard Raimann and Quentin Nelson. I mean, Raimann with a 90.5 run blocking grade, Nelson with an 81.5. Both of them, Trevor, with 11 positively graded run blocks, which is ridiculous. It's ridiculous for one of them, because we see a handful of games, or maybe once or twice a week, where this happens. But to have 2 guys on the same side of the offensive line do it, between Nelson pulling all over the place, and if there's any guy I don't want running at me full speed in the NFL, it's Quentin Nelson for sure. And then Bernhard Raimann is so smooth, man. I mean, his footwork, his ability to get to the second level, just fantastic. This is them along with Philadelphia. Those are 2. I don't think I can name a better left side of an offensive line than these 2 guys. Bernhard Raimann, 4th highest graded left tackle in the league this season, and Quentin Nelson, the highest graded left guard. Look, I think if they're going to stay in this playoff race, and the Broncos loss obviously really hurt their chances, but you keep riding behind this offensive line and the left side of this offensive line. And on the other side, you mentioned, I was talking about the Titans linebackers. I think more so than disappointing, it's just a really tough matchup for a lot of young guys playing. We know Jack Gibbons is out for the season, but Kenneth Murray struggled with a 26.9 run defense grade. James Williams, who's a rookie converted safety from Miami, he really struggled. Cedric Gray, a rookie from North Carolina, struggled. It was just the way this Colts offensive line was getting and scheming their way up to the second level. These linebackers must have been spinning. They must have been in the ice bath after the game extra long, because it was really, really tough for a bunch of young kids to go against an offensive line like this, and a play caller the way Shane Steichen was calling plays. Just an incredible job by him and this offensive line at dominating this game.
Most disappointing. Who you got before we get out of here?
Just that linebacker group. It's a tough day, a tough matchup going into it that got even tougher as it went on.
Thanks for watching, everybody. Make sure you like and subscribe the video. And if you don't have a PFF Plus subscription, you can get one to see all the premium stats that we talked about here on the show, plus the expert betting and fantasy advice over at subscribe.pff.com. The description is also right below, so if you are not a PFF Plus subscriber, you can become one today.